Hi there, thank you so much for joining me today. Kendall Hailstone here, day 13 of my 90-day video challenge. And what I have for you today are some excellent mushroom foraging tips and hacks to help you with hunting for morel mushrooms this season. And the season is upon us, so get ready folks. I personally am very excited. This is my first morel season, and which is kind of funny because I'm making a mushroom foraging tips and hacks video, but I have done research and I've compiled all the information into this video here, and I will also be eventually posting an article once my website is up and running. But yes, so let's go ahead and jump right in. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Thank you so much. And then like this video if you feel like it was of value to you, and leave a comment. I would love to hear about your first mushroom foraging experience, but then also if I left anything out, any information that you feel like is valuable to keep in consideration when you're out there mushroom foraging, please leave that in the comments below too. Thank you so much. So first of all, when is morel season? So I've read that morel season ranges from March to September depending on your area, your elevation, your latitude and all that good stuff. And so, but for the majority of us, it's between March and May. And here in Michigan, you know, we're, I'd say in the pretty middle ground area. You know, it's not, we're not in the south, you know, we're not in the high north, you know, up in Canada or anything like that. So, you know, between March and May is the most ideal times for us. And just something to take into consideration is that black morels actually come up first, and then yellow morels will be following thereafter. When it would be your ideal time? So let's look at mushroom conditions. What are ideal mushroom conditions? They need the right temperature, the right plenty of moisture. Mushrooms are 90% water, so they need a lot of water, and they need oxygen to fruit. And so morels particularly, they are what's called a mycorrhizal fungus, which means they have a symbiotic relationship with the roots of plants, with trees specifically, with certain types of trees specifically. They seem to prefer certain types, in which we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, so as far as when to go out, you know, it'll be springtime obviously, but then you want to make sure you have a nice bout of rain. Just here in Michigan, we had a nice few days, 3 or 4 days of rain, like over the weekend at the end of last week. And so this week, today, I'm actually going out with my kids to go morel foraging. Well, really just morel, not just morel, just mushroom foraging. Also will be looking for morels specifically too, but not just morels. I'll get into that also later in the video. So in regards to temperature, what you want the temperatures to be, for the air temperature, it's been, I've read that it's really good to have like 60-degree temperature during the day and then around 40-degree temperature at night. And with those conditions, that creates the soil temperature to be right around 50 degrees, and that's right around when the morels start popping up. Ooh, so exciting. And as far as, so when they start popping up around 50 degrees and when the season ends is when the soil is around 60 degrees. That's when kind of morels will start plateauing and they won't be fruiting as much anymore. So as I mentioned, rain is important, moisture, and so something to keep an eye out for when you are considering a time to go out foraging. You want a nice bout of rain. I'd say, you know, 3 or 4 days, or, you know, as long as you've had some consistent rainy weather. It doesn't have to be all in a row, but just make sure that the ground is nice and moist. And then you want some nice mild consistent temperatures in that range that I just mentioned. And if you have those conditions in place, get ready to go out and be prepared to get out there and start picking away. So now, pertaining to where to start looking for morel mushrooms, and you know, if you've gone out before or if you have a lot of experience, you know, then I'm sure you have a pretty good idea of where to go, just kind of based on where you've gone in the past and where you've found them before. And especially if you've been paying attention to your surroundings, to the environment where you found morel mushrooms, you probably have an idea of what the different areas that you want to look for that are advantageous for morels to grow in. But if you aren't in that position like myself, where you're just starting out, maybe this is your first season or your first couple seasons, and you just don't really quite have a really good grasp on where morels will be growing, here is some information for you. So first, I just want to point out that you can ask other people, other more experienced mushroom foragers, where they go, but I have found that people tend to be pretty secretive about where they find morel mushrooms specifically, just because they're such a delicacy, and since they, I don't know, sometimes they can be hard to find, not always, but I've heard that they are very elusive, so to speak. And so you can definitely ask, if you know somebody that's a veteran mushroom forager, definitely ask them where they go, and even ask them if they can take you with them. But don't expect them to tell you exactly where their spots are, or to even take you with them. Just like I said, some people are kind of secretive about it, and I don't personally agree with that type of mentality and that philosophy of keeping that knowledge to yourself. I believe the knowledge is meant to be shared, and that we are definitely stronger together. And I can see the point of not telling other people, but I do think, and I'm just gonna go out on a limb here, it's a little selfish. It is. Whatever, you can call it whatever you want, but I think that for me personally, if I find a good spot for morel mushrooms, I'm definitely going to share it with everybody. But the caveat here is that I want to be teaching you also how to go about harvesting the mushrooms, so that first of all, you leave some for others, so you're not just taking all of them, and then also you're not damaging the mycelium, so that those that mycelium body, the underground unseen body of the mushroom will live for an extended period of time and be able to provide us with morel mushrooms for the long term, instead of for example, ripping a morel mushroom out of the ground and damaging the mycelium. Then it has to spend a lot of energy to repair, and so it isn't good for foraging mushrooms when you are damaging the mycelium. So I think it's important to be teaching people how to forage responsibly, and with that caveat, with that condition, I definitely would love to share with all of you where I go to find mushrooms if I am successful in this season. So especially early on in the season, it's good to start looking on like south and western facing slopes, because on those areas the soil will be a little bit warmer, and so the morel, just mushrooms in general, will be growing sooner in those areas. But then also, just depending on what your elevation is, typically the mushrooms will be starting lower elevation and then be growing in higher elevation as the season goes on, as the temperatures rise. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Hills can also be a popular area for morels to grow. So if you find a hilly terrain, then that has some downed trees, some disturbed earth, disturbed area, and then also some good foliage cover, and a nice diverse array of plant life, then take your time looking around there, because it's very likely that some morel mushrooms might be growing there, especially if you have the right tree types in that area too. And like I said, if you have nice good foliage cover, it's going to keep that area moist and the temperature more consistent, and all those things are good for mushroom growth. Just kind of another little tip and trick here: when you're foraging on hillsides, try to position yourself so that you are, because I've kind of done this both ways, where you're walking kind of on the peak of the slope, and then you're kind of looking down at an angle towards the slope, so you have an angle below the foliage, so you can see more of the ground. And so that is a nice little strategy for you to be able to cover more area just with your eyes, to scan the ground with, being able to look basically under the foliage. And that's a nice little, tip and trick there. On the other side of that, I've also done it where I'm walking in the crest of a slope and I'm looking up, and I've also been able to be able to look under the foliage in that way, and be able to scan more ground area with my eyes in that way too. So keep that in mind. So in addition to hilly areas of that sort, if you find an area that has it's fairly rocky, I wouldn't say, pebbles and gravel of that sort, but I'd say like more medium to size rocks. If you have an area more rocky in that sense. Take your time looking around there too, because the rocks, they help block the sun and keep the soil more moist and cool. Obviously that's more applicable like later in the season because you want the temperature to be warm-ish to begin with, but then also the rocks, they will absorb the heat from the sun and keep the soil a more consistent temperature too. So those are all good things for mushroom growth. I did reference other springtime mushrooms, and for example, such as shaggy mane, pearl oysters. Those are some other springtime mushrooms that you may find out there in the season too, which if you do, definitely you scored, and be very grateful for sure. Even if you don't find any morels, those are still great finds. But if you do find those, keep in mind that you just look around those areas as well for morels, because most springtime mushrooms have very similar conditions that they prefer to grow in. So if you find one type, it's very likely you'll find another type too, especially this shaggy mane, because they're another mycorrhizal fungus that grows on the ground, in relationship to plants, to the roots of plants, just similar to morels. And so if you see some shaggy mane growing there, keep your eye out for morels. They might not be too far away. So yeah. Now I just want to get into a little bit about why you want to look for. I've referenced disturbed areas in the earth, and that's something to really keep in mind. So for example, if you have a downed tree, or if you have like a burn site, those are really good examples of a disturbed area, but also a place that's been flooded. That's another example. Or if you have a place that has had big maybe a logging equipment come through and maybe tore up the earth in certain areas. Those types of disturbances to the earth actually create a signal to the mycelium to fruit the bodies, because like I said, it's a mycorrhizal type fungus, and so there's a relationship with the tree's roots and the fungus. And so if there's a disruption between that connection, it sends a signal to the mycelium, say, okay, there's some disturbance here in our supply chain of nutrients and whatnot, and so we need to be creating mushrooms to be dispersing spores to make sure that we can be repopulating the mycelium, because there's a disturbance in our food supply. And so that is one of the reasons why looking for disturbed areas such as, like I said, burn sites, recently fallen trees, and maybe large areas where large equipment have come through, areas where it has flooded. Those are the reasons why the mushrooms, morels specifically, like to grow in those places. Now, according to Rick Hill, who is a wildlife artist and mushroom forager, he says that there's some kind of old-timer knowledge, a couple of different tidbits here, that when the leaves of an oak tree are about the size of a mouse's ear, so pretty small, but that is around the time when morel mushrooms will be coming out. And another kind of old-timer saying, a piece of knowledge and wisdom, is that once the dandelions start popping, that the morels will be following very soon after. So keep that in mind. I just recently saw some dandelions popping, which got me super excited, because I'm like, okay, morels are close behind, so I'm going out, like I said, today to go check them out. So yeah, I'll keep you guys updated about that. So we've talked a little bit about making sure there's proper moisture in the soil, so looking for nice rainy weather before going out. And we've also talked about temperature, making sure the air temperature and the soil temperature are in the optimal ranges for morel growth. But we haven't really talked much about oxygen levels. So something to keep in mind is that mushrooms need oxygen to grow. And so you want to find an area that has good drainage, and so you don't want a place that's like swampy or that is waterlogged, because then it's that's deficient in oxygen, which is what the mushrooms need to grow. And so they like a loamy soil, which is a nice mix of organic material, clay, and sand. And so you want, like I said, a good mix of all that in the soil. So to keep that in mind when you're out there foraging, be observant of your surroundings, of what the sunlight looks like in certain areas, the tree growth, the foliage cover and all that, the different plant life, like I said, the terrain, whether it's hills, it's rocky, all that stuff is important when you are developing a sense of what good morel mushroom conditions look like. I'm sure, as you have probably heard, if you have any interest in morels, that elm trees are very, commonly referenced when talking about foraging for mushrooms. Like, oh, you look for, an elm tree forest, so look for downed elm trees, and you're likely to find morel mushrooms. So that is a great piece of advice, but those aren't the only trees that morel mushrooms like to have relationships with. There's many others as well, including sycamore, hickory, ash, cottonwoods, even oak, aspen, poplars, and even apple trees. So take that in mind, and so don't just look for one type of tree. It's nice to have diversification. I mean, life thrives in a biodiverse type of environment, and so when I'm looking for an area to go foraging, and I'm looking to make sure there's a diversity of plant life, of tree species, so that I can ensure that there's gonna be a nice diverse array of microorganisms, including hopefully the fungus that I'm looking for. I'll actually leave a link in the video below of a website that I use. I think it was through the DNR website for Michigan, that will hopefully help you be able to identify certain areas of different tree types to help you really pinpoint the area that you want to go foraging. And so yeah, hopefully that's helpful for you. All right, so we have hopefully a basic understanding of the conditions that is necessary for growing the mushrooms. We hopefully have an understanding now of when would be the best time to go out foraging. Now when you're out there, what the heck do you look for, right? So now we're gonna get into a little bit about the mushroom identification here. And so I am actually gonna reference my notes here for a second, because some of these mushroom kind of Latin names are difficult for me to remember. And so anyway, so black morels, also called Morchella elata or angusticeps, or Morchella angusticeps. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but that's my best version of it. Those are the black morels. And these are typically smaller in size than the yellow morels. And they have a cap that can grow up to 2 inches high and 1.5 inches wide. And they typically have a conical or egg-shaped cap. Let's see, the black has black ridges with kind of yellowish to pale brown to gray pits, and it darkens with age. Typically, that's what happens with mushrooms. Let's see, the stem is smooth at the top, but usually grooved near the base, and then it has a spore print that is pale cream. Let's see, the stem is hollow from top to bottom, and that's a very important identification kind of key point there. And then the cap is connected at the bottom, not floating like an umbrella, so that's also important to note as well. Now, the yellow morels, also called Morchella esculenta or Morchella deliciosa, they are the larger of the Morel species. And see that they can range in size from 3 inches to 12 inches and taller. Holy smokes, I know, that's crazy. I would love to find a 12-inch large yellow morel this season. That'd be epic. And anywhere between 1 and 3 inches wide or more. And the cap is pale cream, yellow to yellow gray to yellow brown, ridges and pits usually darkening with age. And the stem is white or pale cream, sometimes marked with brown blotches near the base. Let's see, it's sometimes conical, but more often globular or elongated vertical oval. So the cap is connected at the bottom, not floating like an umbrella, just like the black morel. And the spore print is creamy, white or pale ochre. And all these color variations are kind of crazy, but do your best to differentiate. If you have any question about the color, just look it up on the internet, and it'll show you what that color is. Like, for example, I had to look up what pale ochre is. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So as well as knowing what the mushrooms that you're looking for, that you want to harvest, just as important it is to know what those look like, it's also important to know what their toxic lookalikes, how to identify those as well. And so what you want to look out for are the false morels, and also called the Gyromitra esculenta, and those are deadly poisonous when eaten. So please make sure you positively identify all the mushrooms that you forage before eating them, and make sure you cook them thoroughly. That is very important to know. And at this point, I want to take the time and state that it is possible to, if you've never had morel mushroom before, it is possible to have an allergic reaction to it. And so if you've never had it, start with small amounts just to see how your body reacts first, and make sure you cook them thoroughly. So yes, please go ahead and do that for your own safety. And the other type of toxic, look-alike is called Gyromitra caroliniana. Probably butchered that, but caroliniana. Yep, that's all I got. And they're both reddish brown and very variable in shape, but usually roundish. And so, like I said, the black morel is more conical, and then the yellow morel can be conical too, but it's it can also be globular, elongated oval shaped. Whereas the false morel is more round, and it can be more like misshapen and kind of irregular in shape as well. So I did reference harvesting responsibly and ethically, and what that basically means is that when you are out there looking for mushrooms, making sure you're stepping lightly, you're not stomping around, and just being mindful of where you're stepping, because granted, the whole forest or wherever you're looking, there are other organisms that call that place home, and so try your best not to damage the area. And then also, when you are actually harvesting the mushrooms themselves, use a knife, and that's part of being prepared. And I have kind of a list of items that I recommend that you bring with you for harvesting. But yeah, use a foraging knife and just cut at the base. Don't pull the mushroom out of the ground, because that's disturbing the mycelium, and it takes energy to repair it, and that's energy taken away that could be used for growing mushrooms, which is what we want, right? Something else to keep in mind when harvesting your mushrooms is to look at your mushrooms before you harvest them and see what they look like. Do they look fresh? Do they look decayed? Do they look rotten? And something that I read is that very often, people can get sick from eating mushrooms, not just because of an allergic reaction or because they're toxic, but because they're literally rotten. There's bacteria growing in those mushrooms that maybe you weren't paying attention to the quality of them, and you harvested them and cooked them and ate them, so that's something to just keep in mind, is that look at the mushrooms. If they look decayed, just leave them. Definitely a good rule of thumb there. So a couple of other things to keep in mind. First of all, I just want to share with you some items that I recommend that you bring with. So I'd recommend that you first of all bring a lunch, depending on how long you plan on being out there. I also have a foraging knife. Bring a tree identification book, a mushroom identification book. Bring your phone, wear layers, wear good shoes. And then depending on your area, have some type of protection against predators, and to inform yourself of what the potential predators are in your area. Because if you are out, especially foraging in a wilderness area, you just want to be mindful of that. So make sure you are protecting yourself as well. Make sure that you have a bag with holes for harvesting, or a basket. And the advantage of having a bag with holes for harvesting is that it helps keep your mushrooms fresher for longer. Whereas, if you had an enclosed bag with no breathability, then your mushrooms will just rot faster, and you want to keep them fresh, until you can get home and cook them. Or you can have a nice basket. I like to use that too, because I find that it helps me to keep the integrity of my mushrooms a little bit better as I'm walking around, so they're not all on top of each other, squishing each other essentially in my bag. But ultimately, it just depends on how fragile the mushrooms are that you're harvesting. So yeah, keep that in mind. Oh, but also another advantage of having a bag with holes in it is that if there are any leftover spores on the mushrooms, you can kind of be, I guess, passively letting spores drop out of your bag, and hopefully inoculating new areas for mushroom growth and mycelium expansion. So yeah, all that is great stuff. So make sure that you have a compass and your phone. If you are going by yourself, make sure you tell someone where you are going, or when you plan on being back, because especially if you're going out into wilderness area that you're not familiar with, you don't want to get lost. Obviously that's a worst case scenario. But yeah, have a compass, learn how to use a compass, or have a phone. Having a compass definitely, I feel like, is an ideal advantage, because some of those areas in the wilderness won't have a service, and so it's really just a good idea to be prepared in that way in case you're going to an area that you're not familiar with, essentially. And even better yet, bring a foraging buddy with you. That's even better. So yes, I highly recommend those things. Also, the advantage of having your phone with you is that if you have service, you can pin your location. If you find mushrooms in a certain area, you can pin that location, and so you can reference back to the location either later in the season or next season, so you kind of have an idea of where to go in the future. So that's a nice advantage too. Oh, and yes, a walking stick may be very helpful too, especially if you are walking through rough terrain. That's really gonna help you, to traverse that area. But then also, it can actually even help you to gauge the soil quality. And so, if you push your stick down into the ground a couple of inches and it goes in easily, then you know that this has a pretty good soil compaction, optimal for mushroom growth, because you don't want it to be too compact, because then it won't have enough oxygen. And so if it goes in easily, you'll know that it has, that's the appropriate soil compaction. Now that, conversely, if it's hard to go in, then that's probably not a great area to be searching for mushrooms. And lastly, when you get home, check yourself for ticks. Yes, I did say it, ticks. So you have your basket full of mushrooms, you're ready to clean them up and chop them up and cook them or dry them. Just give yourself a once over or twice over, and just make sure, check behind the ears, around the edges of your scalp, all of those, sensitive areas that ticks like to get into. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Well, that pretty much wraps it for today's video. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have an awesome, beautiful day. Get out there, get mushroom foraging. If you have any other questions, please leave it down in the comments below. And otherwise, let me know what your first mushroom foraging experience has been like. I'd love to hear that. Or if you think I left something out, please leave that in the comments below too. It definitely feel like it'd be helpful for everybody. And by no means am I an expert in this area, but I am working on it, diligently learning and growing, so I can add more value to you, and so that I can also experience the benefits of it too. But anyways, I hope you have a beautiful day full of opportunities to grow, expand yourself, and serve and help people. I will see you tomorrow. Farewell, friends. Have a beautiful day. Peace.